The galaxy was old. Older than most civilizations could even comprehend. Stars had been born and died 1,000 times before the first intelligent species had looked up at the sky and wondered what lay beyond their own atmosphere. Empires had risen and crumbled. Wars had been fought over resources, territory, ideology, and pride. Alliances had been forged in desperation and broken in greed. The universe had seen it all, catalogued it all, and moved on without a second thought. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a tiny blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, in a completely average spiral arm of the Milky Way, humanity had been quietly going about its business. The Galactic Cooperative had discovered Earth 43 years ago. At the time, it had been considered a minor event. A pre-warp civilization, barely capable of escaping their own gravity well, stumbling around in their primitive metal rockets. The cooperative scouts had flagged the planet, logged the species, and moved on. Standard procedure. Earth would be watched from a distance. When the humans developed sufficient technology, they would be contacted. They would be invited into the fold, given access to galactic trade networks, offered membership in the Cooperatives Council, and gently guided toward a more peaceful, cooperative way of existing. That had been the plan. It had not gone according to plan. The first contact delegation had arrived at Earth orbit 31 years ago, 12 years after the initial discovery, expecting to find a civilization still struggling to reach its own moon on a regular basis. Instead, they had found a species that had quietly, methodically, and with absolutely terrifying efficiency, built a small but functional fleet of faster-than-light capable vessels. Not elegant ships. Not beautiful ships. Not ships that spoke of a civilization at peace with itself and ready to join a galactic community. No, they were warships. Every single one of them. The Cooperative's first contact team had spent 3 weeks in orbit, studying the human vessels before making formal contact. Their reports back to the Cooperative Council had been concerning. The humans appear to have no concept of a purely exploratory vessel, Ambassador Vex of the Thalaran people had written in his official report. Every ship we have observed carries weapons systems of considerable sophistication. Their propulsion technology is crude compared to ours but functional. Their weapons, however, are not crude at all. We count no fewer than 47 distinct energy weapon configurations across their fleet, along with projectile systems of varying caliber, and what appears to be an entirely new category of explosive ordnance that we have not previously encountered. These are not a people who build ships to explore. These are a people who build ships to fight. The Council had debated what to do for 6 months. Some members had advocated for immediate quarantine, keeping humanity locked behind a buffer zone until they could be properly assessed. Others had argued for immediate diplomatic engagement, reasoning that a hostile humanity was far more dangerous than a cooperative one. A few outliers had suggested simply ignoring Earth entirely and hoping the humans didn't notice them. In the end, diplomacy had won out. Mostly because of Counselor Mira of the Serati, a small silver-scaled being with 4 eyes and an unshakable belief in the fundamental decency of all sentient life. She had argued passionately and at great length that humanity's warlike tendencies were a product of their environment, not their nature. That a species which had spent thousands of years fighting each other for survival on a resource-scarce planet could hardly be blamed for developing a warrior culture. That given peace, stability, and the resources of the galaxy, they would evolve. Give them time, she had said. Give them trade. Give them friendship. They will surprise you. The Council had listened. Formal contact had been made. Trade agreements had been signed. Earth had been invited to send a representative to the Cooperative Council. An observer position, not a voting member, but a seat at the table nonetheless. And humanity had surprised them. Just not in the way Counselor Mira had hoped. 31 years of contact. 31 years of trade, diplomacy, cultural exchange. 31 years of humanity quietly, politely, but absolutely relentlessly building more ships. Commander Sarah Chin stood on the bridge of the U.S. Resolute and watched the stars streak past at faster-than-light speed. She was 44 years old, with close-cropped black hair showing the first threads of silver at her temples, and eyes that had seen enough of the galaxy to have lost most of their youthful wonder without losing any of their sharpness. She had been commanding vessels for the United Earth Space Force for 18 years. She had fought pirates in the Kerrigan Nebula, negotiated a hostage situation with the Dreth Mercenary Guild, and once, memorably, talked a rogue artificial intelligence out of destroying a space station by explaining the concept of jazz to it. She was not easily surprised. But the signal coming in on the long-range communication array was making her frown in a way that suggested surprise was on the horizon. Lieutenant Okafor, she said, not turning from the viewport. Run that signal through the translation matrix again. I want to make sure we're reading it correctly. Lieutenant James Okafor, her communications officer, was a tall Nigerian-American man with quick hands and a quicker mind. He had already run the signal through the matrix twice, but he did it a third time without complaint. That was one of the things Sarah liked about him. He understood that sometimes you needed to check something 3 times not because you doubted the equipment, but because the answer it was giving you was too strange to accept on the first read. Same result, Commander, he said after a moment. The signal is definitely from the Vreth colony on Kepler 442b. It's a standard cooperative distress beacon, frequency and encoding match the official cooperative emergency band. He paused. The content is... He paused again. Is what, Lieutenant? It's a supply request, ma'am. They're asking for food, medicine, basic agricultural equipment. He looked up from his console. They're not calling it a distress signal. They're calling it a resource request. Formal language, very polite. But the quantities they're asking for, he shook his head. Ma'am, they're not asking for a shipment. They're asking for enough supplies to feed a population of about 3 million people for at least 2 years. Sarah turned from the viewport. 3 million people. 2 years. Yes, ma'am. And the Vreth colony has a population of approximately how many? According to our last census data, which is about 8 months old, approximately 3,400,000. The frown deepened. They're asking for supplies to feed almost their entire population. For 2 years. Yes, ma'am. That's not a resource request. She crossed to her command chair and sat down, pulling up the full signal on her personal display. That's a colony in serious trouble. She read through the formal, carefully worded message twice. The Vreth were a proud species, tall, insectoid, their carapaces gleaming in shades of deep green and brown, with a cultural tradition of dignity and self-sufficiency that made asking for help a significant act. The fact that they were asking at all told her more than the words did. Get me Admiral Foster, she said. He's on Earth, Commander. 14-hour communication delay. I know. Send him a message anyway. Flag it urgent. She looked at the signal again. And plot me a course to Kepler 442b. Okafor looked up. Commander? We're the closest Space Force vessel to the Vreth colony by about 6 days. Whatever is happening there, they need help. We're going to go find out what kind. The Resolute isn't carrying significant supply reserves, ma'am. We're a patrol vessel. I know what we are. Sarah Chin leaned back in her chair. But I know what we can do. Send a message to Space Force Command. Tell them what we've got. Tell them I'm diverting to Kepler 442b to assess the situation and that I'm requesting they begin assembling a supply convoy. She paused. A big one. How big? She looked at the numbers again. 3 million people. 2 years. Whatever had gone wrong on that colony, it had gone wrong badly. Tell them to send everything they can spare, she said. And then some. The Resolute dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Kepler 442 system 3 days later, and Sarah Chen's frown, which had barely left her face since the signal arrived, deepened considerably. Contact, said Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb from the tactical station. Webb was her second in command, a broad-shouldered man from Georgia with a slow drawl and absolutely no slowness anywhere else. He'd been reading the sensor data for 20 seconds and his voice already had an edge to it. Multiple contacts. Kepler 442b orbit. Define multiple, Sarah said. 40? No, make that 47 vessels. Mix of configurations. He was quiet for a moment, fingers moving across his display. I'm getting cooperative transponder signals from about 30 of them. The others are. He hesitated. Marcus. The others aren't in any database I have, Commander. Unknown configuration. Unknown transponder codes. Unknown origin. He looked up. They're big. How big? Biggest one is putting out a mass reading comparable to one of our Dreadnought-class vessels. Maybe bigger. He paused. They're in a blockade formation around the planet. The bridge went quiet. Sarah absorbed this. She looked at the sensor data on her own display, 47 vessels around a colony that had sent a polite, formal request for food and medicine. A blockade. Someone had put a blockade around a colony of 3 million people and then, what? Waited? Let them starve? Okafor, she said quietly. Open a channel to the planet. Channel open, Commander. Vreth Colony, this is Commander Sarah Chin of the United Earth Space Force vessel Resolute. We received your resource request and we are here to render assistance. Please respond. Static. Then, after a long pause, a voice, clicking, multi-toned, the Vreth method of speech running through the translation matrix into something approximating human language. Commander Chin. We were not expecting a Space Force vessel. We sent our request to the Cooperative Council. We were the closest vessel, Sarah said. What is your situation? Another pause. Longer this time. Our agricultural systems were destroyed 6 months ago. A fungal pathogen, not natural we believe. Our food reserves will last perhaps 3 more months. We have been attempting to import supplies through normal cooperative channels, but... The voice stopped. Started again. There are vessels in our orbit, Commander. They are not cooperative vessels. They arrived 2 months ago. They have not attacked us. They have not communicated with us. They are simply there. And any supply vessel that has attempted to approach our system has turned back. Turned back, Sarah repeated. Voluntarily? The supply vessels reported being warned off. Threatened. The unknown vessels broadcast on all frequencies that this system is under their jurisdiction and that any vessel attempting to deliver supplies without their authorization will be destroyed. Sarah sat very still for a moment. Someone had poisoned a colony's food supply. Then blockaded it. Then threatened away any rescue ships. 3 million people. 3 months of food left. She looked at the sensor data again. 47 unknown vessels. Okafor, she said. Get me Space Force Command. Priority 1. The response from Admiral David Foster came back 11 hours later, accounting for the communication delay to Earth and his immediate turnaround response time. Sarah had been expecting to wait longer. The fact that he had responded within hours of receiving her message told her that he had already been watching the situation. His face on her screen was calm in the way that senior military officers train themselves to be calm, controlled, measured, giving nothing away. But his eyes told a different story. She had known David Foster for 20 years. She knew what his eyes looked like when he was angry. They looked like this. Commander Chin, he said. Your assessment matches what we've been piecing together from other sources. The situation on Kepler 442b is more complex than a simple colony crisis. We've been receiving intelligence reports for the past 3 months. Nothing solid, but enough threads to suggest that this is not random. The Vreth colony sits on one of the largest deposits of a mineral called carite in the known galaxy. Carite is essential for manufacturing the new generation of FTL drives. It's worth more than you can easily calculate. He leaned forward slightly. Someone wants that mineral. And they've decided that the easiest way to get it is to starve the colony into surrendering their mining rights. Sarah's jaw tightened. We don't know who the unknown vessels belong to yet. Our analysts are working on it. But here's what I need you to understand, Commander. The Cooperative Council has been informed of the situation. They have been deliberating for 6 weeks. They have not yet reached a consensus on how to respond. In the meantime, 3 million Vreth are running out of food. He was quiet for a moment. You asked for a supply convoy. I'm sending you more than that. Full details in the encrypted attachment. You are hereby authorized to act as the on-site commander for this operation. Your orders are to assess the situation, make contact with the unknown vessels if possible and to ensure that those supplies reach Kepler 442b. By whatever means necessary. The message ended. Sarah sat in the quiet of her quarters for a long time after it finished. Then she opened the encrypted attachment. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she sat back in her chair and for the first time in a very long while, Commander Sarah Chin smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that belonged on the face of someone who had just been handed exactly the tools they needed for exactly the job in front of them. By whatever means necessary, she said to the empty room. She stood up and walked back to the bridge. The encrypted attachment from Admiral Foster contained 2 things. The first was a full intelligence briefing on the situation at Kepler 442b. Everything Space Force had managed to piece together over the past 3 months, including commercial shipping logs, intercepted communications fragments, and a report from a cooperative intelligence operative who had gone silent 4 weeks ago and hadn't been heard from since. The second was a fleet manifest. Sarah read the fleet manifest 3 times, cross-referencing it with the tactical display on her desk, and by the time she was done she had filled 2 pages of her personal notepad with calculations, course projections and arrival time estimates. Then she walked to the bridge, called her senior officers to the conference room adjacent to it, and laid everything out on the table. There were 5 of them around that table besides herself. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, her XO. Lieutenant James Okafor, Communications. Lieutenant Commander Dr. Priya Patel, Chief Medical Officer. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, Chief Engineer. And Ensign Thomas Park, the youngest officer on the ship and in Sarah's estimation, the one most likely to one day command a vessel of his own, if he survived long enough to grow into the job. She had put Thomas Park at the table because she believed in giving young officers a view of how decisions got made. Even decisions like this one. Here's what we know, she said and walked them through it. The Vreth colony on Kepler 442b had been established 60 years ago, back before humanity had even been discovered by the cooperative. 3 million people, Vreth, plus a significant minority population of other cooperative species who had settled there over the decades. The planet itself was moderately habitable, not ideal for most species, but the Vreth had adapted to its slightly higher gravity and lower oxygen content without much difficulty. They had built cities, farms, schools, hospitals. They had built a community. 6 months ago, something had infected their agricultural systems. A fungal pathogen, engineered. The Vreth scientists were certain it was engineered, because it targeted specifically the food crops that made up 80% of the colony's diet and left everything else untouched. Within weeks, the entire year's harvest had been destroyed. The colony's stored reserves were substantial. They were a self-sufficient people, but substantial reserves only last so long when you have no way to replenish them. 2 months ago, 47 unidentified vessels had taken up position in the system. The cooperative supply ships had turned back. Who are they? Marcus Webb asked. Working theory, Sarah said, is the Keth Dominion. She pulled up an image on the conference room display, a sleek, dark vessel longer than it was wide, built on lines that suggested speed over armor. The Keth aren't cooperative members. They operate in the outer sectors, mostly in what the cooperative classifies as unregulated space. They have a reputation for, she chose the word carefully, economic aggression. They've done this before. Found a resource-rich colony in trouble, created or worsened the trouble, then moved in when the colony was desperate enough to accept their terms. HFY, Thomas Park said quietly, then caught himself. Sorry, Commander. I meant, after this, how do they expect to get away with it? They're blocking a cooperative colony. The cooperative is deliberating, Sarah said. Has been for 6 weeks. The Keth are apparently betting that by the time the council reaches a decision and assembles a response, the colony will have signed over their mining rights just to get food for their children. She paused. It's worked before. Twice that we know of. On colonies that didn't have a Space Force vessel 6 light days away. Silence around the table. What's in the attachment? Elena Vasquez asked. She was the most direct person Sarah had ever met. A Mexican-American engineer from Houston who expressed everything in terms of what was physically possible and what was physically not. The Fleet Manifest. Sarah brought up the list on the display. The room went quiet in a different way. That can't be right, Marcus said slowly. It's right. That's. He counted. That's 38 vessels. 39 including us. And that's not a supply convoy. No, Sarah agreed. It's not. She let them look at it for a moment. The list of ships, their classes, their armament specifications. The largest vessels on the list, 3 of them, were Dreadnought class. The newest ones in the fleet, commissioned in the last 5 years. Below them on the list, 8 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, 6 frigates, 7 gunships, and the Resolute herself, a patrol cruiser that was the smallest vessel in the group by a significant margin and which had, nonetheless, been designated as the flagship for this operation. Because she was already there. And because Admiral Foster apparently trusted her. 39 vessels, Thomas Park said, and his voice had gone very quiet. 447 unknown ships. 47 unknown ships that have never faced a human fleet, Sarah said. 47 ships that blockaded a colony because they were certain that no one would come. 47 ships that have been sitting in that orbit for 2 months without a serious challenge, getting comfortable. She looked around the table. There are also supply ships in the convoy. 40 supply vessels. Food, medicine, agricultural equipment, seeds, everything the colony needs. The military ships are the escort. They're coming here to punch a hole in that blockade, Marcus said. They're coming here to make sure those supplies get delivered, Sarah said. How much of a hole needs to be punched depends on what happens when we talk to them. You're going to try to talk first, Elena said. It wasn't quite a question. Always, Sarah said. But not while holding nothing. I want those ships in position before I open a channel to whoever is in command of that blockade. I want them to see exactly what's come to visit them. She looked around the table one more time. We have approximately 19 days before the main fleet arrives. During that time, we are the only Space Force vessel in this system. We do not engage the blockade. We do not provoke them. We hold position at the edge of the system, we keep talking to the colony, and we make absolutely certain that those 47 ships know we are here. She paused. Any questions? Thomas Park raised his hand slightly. What do we do if they try to make us leave? Sarah Chen looked at her youngest officer with those sharp, experienced eyes. We stay, she said simply. The Resolute took up position at the edge of the Kepler system, 12 million kilometers from the blockade, and did nothing provocative. This turned out to be more difficult than it sounded. On the third day, one of the blockade ships, a mid-sized vessel roughly equivalent to a human destroyer, broke formation and moved toward them. Slowly. Not an attack run. A warning gesture. They're broadcasting, Okafor said. Translating now. The voice that came through the speakers was deep, mechanical. Not because the species didn't have organic vocal equipment, but because whoever was speaking had chosen to run their communication through a voice modulator. Deliberate anonymity. Unidentified vessel. This system is under the jurisdiction of the Kepler Reclamation Authority. You are in violation of restricted space. You will withdraw immediately or face interdiction. Sarah looked at Okafor. Kepler Reclamation Authority. That's a new one. Never heard of it, Commander. Neither has our database. She pressed the open channel button. Kepler Reclamation Authority vessel. This is Commander Sarah Chin of the United Earth Space Force Patrol Cruiser Resolute. We have received a distress signal from the Vreth colony on Kepler 442b and we are here in a humanitarian capacity. We are not in violation of any cooperative treaty or regulation. Please identify your flag state and legal authority. A long pause. Then, the United Earth Space Force has no jurisdiction in this system. You will withdraw. Under what legal framework? Sarah asked pleasantly. Another pause. Longer. Final warning. Withdraw or face consequences. Sarah kept her voice completely level. We will not be withdrawing. We are a Space Force vessel operating in accordance with cooperative humanitarian law, responding to a declared colonial emergency. If you have a legal objection to our presence, I invite you to file a formal complaint with the Cooperative Council. She paused. In the meantime, we'll be right here. The blockade ship held its position for 6 hours. Then, without another word, it returned to the formation. Sarah watched it go. They're not sure what to do with us, Marcus said from beside her. Good, she said. I want them uncertain. Uncertain people make mistakes, and mistakes give you information. On the 7th day, something changed. Sarah was in her quarters reviewing supply logistics when Okafor's voice came over the intercom. Commander, you should come to the bridge. She was there in 90 seconds. What is it? 2 things, Okafor said. First, we've been getting intermittent transmissions from inside the blockade. Not from the colony. From one of the blockade ships. He looked up. Someone on one of those ships is trying to contact us in a way that their own command doesn't know about. Sarah absorbed this. What are they saying? The signal is fragmented and heavily encrypted. We've been decoding it in pieces. So far we have. He checked his display. We have the words not, voluntary, crew, hostage, and a partial set of coordinates that correspond to, he blinked, to a location inside one of the larger blockade vessels. Someone on one of those ships is a prisoner, Marcus said. That's one interpretation, Sarah agreed. What's the second thing, Lieutenant? Long-range sensors picked up new contacts 20 minutes ago, Commander. Okafor's voice was carefully neutral. Just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. Sarah turned to the tactical display. The new contacts were resolving as she watched, their transponder signals blinking into recognition one by one. Human vessels. Not 39 of them. The fleet manifest had said 39. But as the signals kept resolving, kept appearing on the display, Sarah found herself counting higher and higher, and when she stopped she stood very still for a moment. 52, Marcus said quietly. I count 53, Thomas Park said from the sensor station. 53, Sarah confirmed, reading the display. Someone added ships to the convoy. She reached for the communication panel. Get me Admiral Foster. He'll be on one of those ships, ma'am, Okafor said. Direct communication, no delay. She blinked. Then she understood. He came himself. Resolute, said a familiar voice from the speakers before she could even open a channel. Come. Measured. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years in uniform and wore it like a second skin. This is Admiral David Foster aboard the UES Judgment. Good to see you're still here, Commander. Admiral. Sarah straightened slightly, an unconscious reflex. I count 53 vessels, sir. The manifest said 39. The manifest was accurate when I sent it. Then a few things happened. Pause. Word got out about what was happening at Kepler 442b. I had commanding officers volunteering their ships faster than I could process the paperwork. Some of them I didn't even authorize, they just started heading in this direction and filed the proper forms along the way. Very technically within regulations. Sarah almost smiled. Who was that? Captain Jim Kowalski on the Iron Hand was the first. You know him? I know him. Of course you do. Everybody knows Kowalski. A brief pause that might have been the Admiral allowing himself a moment of wry amusement. 53 warships, Commander. Plus 40 supply vessels behind them, staying back until we've cleared the path. You're still on site, Commander. I'm here as senior officer, but you've been on the ground, figuratively speaking, for the past week. Brief me. Sarah Chin took a breath. Then she briefed him. Everything, the blockade, the warnings, the contact they'd managed to make with the colony, the fragmented transmission suggesting a prisoner on one of the blockade vessels. When she was done, Admiral Foster was quiet for a long moment. Caro, he said. It was an old expression, had been kicking around Space Force slang for about 15 years, picked up from somewhere, meaning something like, understood, noted, moving forward. What do you recommend? We hail them, Sarah said. All of them. Simultaneously. I want whoever is in command of that blockade to look at their sensor display and see 53 human warships and understand clearly and completely what that means. And then I want to give them a chance to leave. And if they don't? Then we make sure those supplies get through, she said. By whatever means necessary. Another pause. Make the call, Commander. The communication went out at 0900 hours ship's time. Sarah had spent 3 hours the night before writing it. Not the words. Those had come relatively easily once she knew what she wanted to say. What had taken time was the calibration. The precise tone. The exact balance between absolute clarity and the barest minimum of hostility. You didn't want to threaten people into a corner and give them no way out. But you also needed them to understand, completely, unambiguously, with no room for misinterpretation, exactly what they were looking at and exactly what would happen if they made the wrong choice. She had written it, revised it, read it aloud to herself in the quiet of her quarters at 0200 hours, listening to the words, feeling where they landed, revised it again. Sent it to Marcus for a second read, received it back with 2 small suggestions which she had incorporated. Sent the final version to Admiral Foster with no request for changes, just a courtesy copy. Received back a 1-word response, send it. Open channel, she said. All frequencies. Make sure it reaches every one of those 47 ships. Channel open, Commander. All frequencies. They're all receiving. Sarah Chin stood at the center of her bridge and spoke. Attention vessels of the Kepler Reclamation Authority. This is Commander Sarah Chin of the United Earth Space Force, speaking as on-site commander of Task Force Kepler. You are currently looking at your long-range sensors. I want you to take a moment and look carefully at what you see. She paused. Let them look. 53 vessels of the United Earth Space Force are now present in this system. They include 3 Dreadnought-class vessels, 8 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, 6 frigates, 7 gunships, and additional support craft. Additionally, 40 supply vessels are holding position outside this system, carrying food, medicine, and equipment sufficient to relieve the humanitarian emergency you have deliberately created on Kepler 442b. Another pause. You have been operating on the assumption that no one would come. That the Cooperative Council would deliberate long enough for your strategy to succeed. That the colony would sign over their mineral rights to avoid the deaths of their children by starvation. That the cost of intervention would be too high, the problem too distant, the politics too complicated. She let that sit for a moment. You were wrong about all of those things. Her voice remained even. Not cold. Cold was a performance and performances could be read as weakness. This was simply factual. Simply true. You have 3 options. The first, stand down your blockade, withdraw from this system, and allow our supply convoy to deliver aid to the colony. If you choose this option, we will not pursue you. We have no interest in pursuing you. Our interest is the 3 million people on that planet who need food, medicine, and help. If you leave, we let you leave. She took a breath. The second option, Remain in position, refuse to communicate, and force us to remove you. I want to be direct about what this means. We have assessed your fleet. We have run tactical projections. We are not going to stand here and pretend this is a closer contest than it is. If you force a confrontation, we will win it. We will take casualties. I'm not pretending otherwise, and so will you. But the outcome is not in doubt. The supplies will reach Kepler 442b. The only question is what the cost of that delivery will be. Another pause. Shorter. The third option, we talk. You tell me who you actually represent and what you actually want, and we have a conversation about whether there's a solution here that doesn't require anyone to die. I'm genuinely open to this option. I'm a soldier. I don't enjoy war. I won't pretend that war is something to be sought when conversation might serve. She clasped her hands behind her back. You have 6 hours to choose. After 6 hours, if we have not received a response, we will take your silence as your answer and we will proceed accordingly. This channel will remain open. We are listening. She nodded at Okafor to close the transmission. The bridge was very quiet. Think they'll respond? Thomas Park asked. Someone on one of those ships will, Sarah said. Whether it's the right someone is a different question. They responded in 4 hours and 20 minutes. Not on the general frequency. A single channel directed at the Resolute specifically. The voice was different from the modulated one they'd heard before. This one was unmodulated, organic, with a particular clicking undertone of a Vreth speaker. But this wasn't coming from the planet. It was coming from one of the blockade ships. Commander Chin. I'm here, she said. Who am I speaking to? My designation would be difficult for your translation matrix to render accurately. You may call me Sector Voice Kren. I am the appointed diplomatic representative of the Keth Dominion aboard this fleet. Pause. I notice you did not name the Keth Dominion in your broadcast. I didn't want to embarrass you publicly before giving you a chance to respond privately, Sarah said. Was I right that it's the Keth Dominion? You were. Another pause. Your intelligence services are better than we anticipated. They usually are. Sector Voice Kren, are you in a position to speak for the fleet commander? I am the fleet commander's designated voice. He does not speak directly to foreign military officers. Then I'll speak to you. Sarah kept her voice measured. The transmission you referenced, the fragmented one we picked up from inside your fleet. Someone is being held against their will on one of your ships. I want to know who that is and I want them released. A longer pause. That matter is complicated. Most things worth discussing are. There is a Vreth scientist aboard the Dominant Purpose. She was acquired during the initial operation. She has expertise in agricultural biology that was considered valuable. You kidnapped a scientist. The terminology is accurate. Sarah's voice didn't change. Her name? Researcher Yethkara. She has been unharmed. I want her back. That's not a negotiating point. That's a precondition for any conversation beyond what I've already said. She is released to the colony, unharmed, within 2 hours, or we move directly to option 2. A very long silence. You are not what we were told to expect. What were you told to expect? A patrol vessel. A single ship responding to a resource request. Time to complete our operation and withdraw before any significant Space Force response could be organized. Another pause. Our intelligence suggested that the human Space Force would take at minimum 60 days to respond to a colonial emergency outside human space. Your intelligence was about 30 years out of date, Sarah said. Our response time has improved considerably. She let that land. The scientist. 2 hours. Pause. Then, agreed. Researcher Yethkara was transferred to the colony in 1 hour and 40 minutes. She arrived thin, frightened, and furious in equal measure, which, Sarah noted when the colony confirmed her arrival, sounded like exactly the response you'd expect from a Vreth scientist who had just spent 2 months as a prisoner and was now back with her people. The colony administrator, a Vreth elder named Counselor Bresh, sent a brief personal message to Sarah. Thank you, Commander. 3 words. But the weight in them was considerable. Sarah sent back, hold on a little longer. We're getting those supplies to you. Then she went back to the negotiation. Sector Voice Kren, it turned out, was not the real problem. He was a career diplomat who had been told this would be a clean, quick operation. An abandoned colony, desperate population, minimal cooperative response. He had been sent to manage the paperwork of the Vretha's capitulation. He had not been briefed for this. He was doing his best, but his best was increasingly stretched. The real problem was Fleet Commander Dask, who communicated through Kren and whose responses, even filtered through the diplomat's careful phrasing, grew increasingly aggressive as the hours passed. Fleet Commander Dask wishes to convey, Kren said on the 5th hour, that the Kerite deposits beneath Kepler 442b represent a strategic resource of considerable importance to the Keth Dominion. The Dominion is prepared to offer the colony significant financial compensation and an improved standard of living in exchange for exclusive mining rights. The current situation is the result of unfortunate circumstance, not hostile intent. The unfortunate circumstance being the engineered fungal pathogen that destroyed their crops, Sarah said. Fleet Commander Dask makes no comment on the origin of the agricultural difficulties. Of course he doesn't. Sarah looked at the tactical display. 53 ships. 47 ships. Sector voice Kren, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you're a professional and you deserve directness. This negotiation is not going to result in the Keth Dominion obtaining mining rights to Kepler 442b. That is not on the table. The colony is not going to sign over their rights under duress, and any agreement signed under these circumstances would not be recognized by the Cooperative Council. So whatever your fleet commander is hoping to achieve by continuing this standoff, he needs to recalibrate. Pause. He will not simply withdraw. Why not? Because. Kren hesitated. And in that hesitation, Sarah heard something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. Not diplomatic uncertainty, personal uncertainty. The kind that came from someone who knew something they hadn't said yet. Because he believes that if he withdraws without achieving his objective, the consequences from his own government will be severe. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What consequences? Commander Chin, I am a diplomat. I have been in this service for 30 years. I have negotiated in difficult situations many times. But I have never been in a situation where the person I represent is more dangerous to me than the person across the table. Another pause. I do not say this lightly. Sarah sat forward. Kren. Are you telling me that Fleet Commander Dask is acting against the interests of his own people? A long silence. I am telling you, Kren said carefully, that the Keth Dominion as a whole is not represented by what is happening in this system. I'm telling you that there are factions, and that the faction represented by Fleet Commander Dask has made commitments that require a specific outcome here, regardless of the cost. Who made those commitments to? That, Kren said, is what I have been trying to find out for 6 weeks. Sarah leaned back in her chair. The situation had just become significantly more complicated than a straightforward blockade. Caro, she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Marcus, standing beside her, raised an eyebrow. We have a rogue fleet commander, she said, whose own diplomat doesn't trust him, who is operating on orders from someone we can't identify, who is trapped here because leaving means facing consequences from people we don't know yet. That about covers it, Marcus agreed. Pull up everything we have on the Keth Dominion, she said. Internal politics, factions, recent power shifts. I want to understand who Dask is working for. And in the meantime? Sarah looked at the clock. 5 hours and 40 minutes since she'd given the 6-hour ultimatum. 20 minutes left on that clock. In the meantime, she said, we prepare for option 2. The intelligence files on the Keth Dominion filled 3 hours of reading. Sarah read them in fragments during the 20-minute gap between the deadline passing and the moment she would have to make a decision about what came next. Okafor kept the channel to Kren open, silent, but open, a deliberate signal that conversation was still possible. The fleet held position. The blockade held position. The planet waited. The Keth Dominion was approximately 300 years old, established when several smaller clan-based societies in the outer sectors had merged, not peacefully but inevitably, into a single political entity. They were humanoid, roughly in the way that many of the galaxy species were humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, bilateral symmetry, a head with sensory organs at the top. But the similarities ended there. The Keth were tall, averaging about 9 feet, with dense, layered skin that served as natural armor, and a social structure built around the concept of Kethrak, which the translation matrix rendered approximately as honor through acquisition. Status in Keth society was determined by what you had obtained for your people. Resources, territory, technology, influence. A Keth leader who returned empty-handed from a mission wasn't just a failure, they were, in the most fundamental cultural sense, disgraced. Their family would suffer for it. Their clan would suffer. The disgrace would follow them for generations. Fleet Commander Dask wasn't just trying to complete a mission. He was trying to avoid a fate that, in Keth culture, was arguably worse than death. HFY, Thomas Park said when Sarah explained this at the morning briefing, and then looked embarrassed about the expression again. Sorry? I meant, after this, what do we do with that information? Knowing he can't leave empty-handed? We figure out what he can bring back, Sarah said. Something that isn't the Vretha's mineral rights. Something that lets him claim a victory even if it's not the victory he came for. Do we have anything like that? Priya Patel asked. Sarah tapped her fingers on the table. We might. The Cooperative Council, it turned out, had not been entirely useless during their 6 weeks of deliberation. While they hadn't managed to agree on a direct response to the blockade, they had, under significant pressure from the human representative and 3 other member species, authorized the creation of a new framework for outer sector resource disputes. It was called the Kepler Accords informally, though it covered far more than just the Kepler system. It was essentially a legal mechanism for disputed resource claims to be mediated rather than fought over, with financial settlements available for parties who could demonstrate legitimate interest in a resource area. Sarah had read about the Kepler Accords in one of the background briefings. At the time, she'd noted it as potentially relevant and moved on. Now she went back to it. The Keth Dominion was not a cooperative member, but they were an associated trading partner. And the Kepler Accords had been specifically designed to include associated trading partners, because the cooperative members who had pushed it through were pragmatic people who understood that the whole point was to create a mechanism that reduced conflict across all parties, not just among themselves. Under the Kepler Accords, the Keth Dominion could file a formal resource claim on the Kerite deposits beneath Kepler 442b. Not for exclusive rights, the colony would never agree to that, and the Accords didn't allow it. But for a negotiated share. A percentage of mining operations. Financial participation in exchange for investment in colonial infrastructure. A deal. An actual, legitimate business arrangement. It wasn't what Fleet Commander Dask had come for. But it was something he could bring home. Something that had a number attached to it. Something that, in Keth culture, might qualify as sufficient acquisition to preserve his honor. Sarah spent 40 minutes on the communication to Kren. She wasn't pitching a treaty, she wasn't authorized to do that, and she knew it. She was pitching a possibility. A conversation. A path that didn't end with ships on fire and people dead. Kren was quiet for a long time after she finished. Fleet Commander Dask will not accept this, he said finally. Will you present it to him? Yes. But I tell you now, he will not accept. Why are you so certain? Another pause. Longer. Because Fleet Commander Dask is not actually interested in the Kerite. Sarah went very still. What is he interested in? Commander Chin. I have been trying to tell you something for the past several hours without saying it directly, because saying it directly puts me in considerable personal danger. I need you to understand that. I understand. Fleet Commander Dask received his orders from a source outside the Keth Dominion government. Not a Keth faction. An external party. An entity that wants this colony to fail, not for its resources but for what its failure will demonstrate. The Kerite was a cover story. The actual objective is to show that the cooperative cannot protect its colonies. To show that the human space force is limited in its response capability. To show to every species watching that the galaxy's current power structure is weaker than it appears. Sarah sat very still. Someone paid the Keth to do this as a demonstration. Yes. Of what the cooperative can't do. Of what it won't do. There is a difference. The Cooperative Council has been deliberating for 6 weeks. Without your fleet, without the human response, this would have succeeded. 3 million Vreth would have starved or surrendered. And every small colony, every independent species in the outer sectors, every planet wondering whether to stay within the cooperative or seek other arrangements, they would have seen it. Sarah was silent for a moment. She was thinking about a lot of things. About the 47 ships. About the 53 ships behind her. About 3 million people eating their reserves. About a scientist who'd been kidnapped. About a career diplomat sitting in a room on a hostile ship, taking a very large personal risk to tell her the truth. Kren, she said quietly. Who is the external party? I don't know their name. I know that they are powerful. I know that they have resources significantly beyond what they have deployed here. And I know, a pause. I know that Fleet Commander Dask has orders to ensure that no human military force leaves this system able to report what happened here. The bridge went absolutely silent. He has orders to destroy us, Sarah said flatly. Not necessarily. There are other ways to prevent a report. Jamming. Prisoners. Delays sufficient for... Kren stopped. Commander Chin. I've given you everything I have. I am doing so because I am a diplomat, and what is happening here is the opposite of what diplomacy exists to accomplish. I would like, if it is possible, to leave this system alive and without having participated in a massacre. It's possible, Sarah said. But I need something from you. Name it. I need you to get me directly to Fleet Commander Dask. Not through you. Not through intermediaries. I need to speak to him myself directly right now. A very long pause. That will be very difficult. I know. Can you do it? Another pause. Then, give me 20 minutes. It took 35. But it happened. The voice that came through was deep, multi-layered. Keth vocal cords apparently produced harmonics that the translation matrix struggled with, giving the voice a slightly doubled quality, like two people speaking at slightly different pitches in perfect synchrony. Commander Chin. Not a question. A statement of presence. Fleet Commander Dask, she said. Thank you for speaking with me directly. I am told you have information relevant to my situation. I have information relevant to everyone's situation, she said. Yours, mine, the colonies, and whoever sent you here to be used as a pawn in something bigger than this system. Pause. The doubled voice was hard to read. The emotion, if any, didn't translate well. But the silence was informative. He hadn't disconnected. He was listening. You were sent here to fail, Sarah said. Not in the way you were told to fail, by succeeding in your mission and then having that success eliminated as evidence. You were sent here to be expended. The plan was never for the Keth Dominion to actually acquire the Kerite rights. The plan was to put 47 Keth ships in a situation where they would either accomplish something impossible or be destroyed, and in either case, demonstrate the cooperative's weakness. Another pause. Longer. You are speculating. I'm speculating based on what your own diplomat told me because he didn't want to be part of a massacre. Which means at least one person in your command agrees with my speculation enough to risk his career to prevent it. The pause this time had a different quality. Kren spoke to you. Kren told me the truth, Sarah said. That's all. He told me the truth because he's a diplomat who understands that what's happening here is an act of deliberate manipulation, not a legitimate military operation. She kept her voice level. Fleet Commander. You are a military officer. I am a military officer. I would like to tell you something that one military officer tells another when they're in a situation that was manufactured by people who aren't here. Speak. You were given impossible orders by someone who wanted you in an impossible position. I don't know if you knew that going in or if you figured it out since. But you know it now. And you have a choice about what to do with that knowledge. She paused. I'm not offering you a surrender. I'm not offering you an ultimatum. I'm offering you a third option that nobody who gave you your orders is going to tell you about. I'm offering you the truth of what's happening here, and the chance to respond to the truth rather than to the fiction you were handed. The silence stretched out. 8 seconds. 12. 20. What is it that you want, Commander Chin? I want the blockade lifted. I want the supply convoy to reach the colony. I want to take my ships home. And I want whoever sent you here to know that this didn't work. And what do I receive in exchange? You receive the Kepler Accords framework, which gives the Keth Dominion a legitimate path to resource sharing on Kerite deposits. Not just here but system-wide. You receive the intelligence I just gave you about who used you, which I suspect you'll find considerably more valuable than any mining rights. And you receive the ability to walk away from this system without a battle that you will not win. Another long silence. You are very certain that you would win. Yes, Sarah said simply. You are not afraid. I'm afraid, she said. I'm afraid of what happens to the people on that planet if I fail. I'm afraid of what happens to my crews if we fight. I'm afraid of losing good people to someone else's manufactured crisis. She paused. But I'm not afraid of you, Fleet Commander. Because I don't think you're my enemy. I think you're someone who was put in a situation where they became an obstacle to something I care about. And obstacles can be moved without being destroyed. The silence after that was very long. Then, in that double harmonic voice, I will require 1 hour to consult with my officers. Take 2, Sarah said. Caro. She closed the channel and sat back in her chair. The bridge was very quiet. Thomas Park looked at her with something that wasn't quite awe and wasn't quite disbelief but was somewhere in the middle of both. Do you think he'll actually stand down? He asked. I think, Sarah said carefully, that Fleet Commander Dask is a pragmatic man who was handed an impossible task by someone who doesn't care whether he lives or dies. And I think pragmatic people, when you show them a door, tend to walk through it. She paused. But get the fleet to battle stations anyway. Quietly. I don't want to look threatening, but I want us ready. Yes, Commander. And somebody get me a coffee, she said. This is going to be a long 2 hours. The 2 hours passed in almost complete silence. Sarah drank her coffee. Reviewed tactical projections for the fourth time. Read through the Kepler Accords documentation again, more carefully this time, making notes on which provisions might be most appealing to the Keth from a face-saving standpoint. Talked briefly with Admiral Foster, who listened to her account of the conversation with Dask, said, "You did good, Commander," and then went back to managing the fleet with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent decades making large, complicated things run smoothly. The fleet held position. The blockade held position. The planet waited. Counselor Bresh of the colony sent a brief status update. Reserves holding, population stable, medical situation manageable for now. Reading between the lines, Sarah understood that the food situation was more precarious than the formal report made it sound. 3 months of reserves could become 2 months very quickly if distribution systems started failing, or if a population already stressed by months of uncertainty started making decisions based on fear rather than rational allocation. The clock ran out. She opened the channel. Fleet Commander Dask. Your time is up. I am aware. The doubled voice was different now. Something in the harmonics had shifted, a quality she couldn't quite define but that reminded her, unexpectedly, of the sound of someone who has made a decision they aren't sure about and is standing on the far side of it. My officers are not unanimous. I didn't expect them to be. 7 of my 47 commanders believe your assessment of our situation is accurate and that withdrawal is the appropriate response. 12 believe that we should engage your fleet before your tactical advantage increases further. The remainder are uncertain. What do you believe? I believe, Dask said, that the entity that sent us here assumed we would fight and lose and thus demonstrate that the cooperative and its human partners cannot prevent determined aggression. I believe that fighting and losing would therefore serve their purposes. A pause. I find that I am unwilling to serve their purposes. Sarah kept her voice level. Then don't. It is not simple. There are 12 commanders who will not accept withdrawal. They are influential. They have ships. How many of the 47 ships are under their command? 16. Pause. Fleet Commander. What happens if you order a withdrawal and 16 ships refuse? The answer when it came was very quiet. Then we have a different kind of problem. Would those 16 ships fight us? Possibly. Or they would fight me. Or both. Pause. Commander Chin. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. If I order a withdrawal and a portion of my fleet refuses and remains in this system, would you treat those remaining ships as hostile? Sarah thought about this carefully. That depends on what they do. If they continue to blockade the colony, yes. If they simply remain in position without interfering with the supply convoy, we would attempt to negotiate their withdrawal before escalating to force. She paused. But I won't make a promise I'm not certain I can keep. If those ships threaten the colony or threaten the supply convoy, I will respond. That is honest. I try to be. Another silence. Then, I want to propose something. I'm listening. I want to speak to you in person. Aboard a neutral vessel. You, me, my diplomat, and whoever you choose to bring. I want this conversation to be real, not over a channel where either of us is being monitored. Sarah looked at Marcus, who raised his eyebrows slightly. She looked at the tactical display. She thought about Kren taking a risk to tell her the truth. She thought about Dask, and the particular quality of that doubled voice when he said I find I am unwilling to serve their purposes. She thought about 3 million people who were hungry. I'll come to you, she said. Aboard a Keth vessel. You choose which one. That is... Pause. Not what I expected. I know. But if I'm asking you to trust that I'm telling you the truth, the least I can do is demonstrate that I mean it. She paused. Besides, I want to see your ships up close. The pause this time had a different quality. If she was reading it right, and she might not be, alien vocal cues were notoriously difficult. It was surprise. Possibly the faintest beginning of something that might eventually become respect. Tomorrow. 0800 hours ship's time. The diplomatic voice, Kren's vessel. It is the smallest in our fleet and he has been aboard it long enough that it is reasonably certain not to have been modified for hostile purposes. That's either reassuring or very darkly funny, Sarah said. Kren said the same thing. She almost smiled. 0800, I'll be there. Marcus, predictably, had thoughts about this. Commander, you're going to board a Keth vessel. Yes. With 47 of them and 53 of us. 54 counting the Resolute. That's not my point. I know what your point is, Marcus. She turned to face him. And you're right that there's a risk. There's also a risk in every other option. If I refuse the meeting, Dask might read it as bad faith and decide that the 12 commanders pushing for a fight have the right idea. If I stay on this ship and keep negotiating from a distance, I can't read him, I can't see what he actually is. I've been making judgments about him based on tone of voice through a translation matrix. That's not enough. She paused. I've been in more dangerous rooms than a Keth diplomatic vessel. Have you? She thought about it. The jazz thing was worse. Marcus stared at her. The AI jazz thing? You try explaining bebop to an entity that experiences time non-linearly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, take Thomas. Why Thomas? Because he's got good instincts and he doesn't scare easily. And because you told me you wanted to give young officers a view of how decisions get made. Sarah looked at her XO for a moment. This seems like an extreme classroom. Best ones usually are. She considered it. Fine. Thomas comes. You stay here and manage the fleet. Understood. He paused. Commander. For what it's worth, I think you're right about Dask. But I think there's something we're still missing. Someone sent him here for a reason that we haven't fully understood yet. The demonstration theory makes sense, but... He shook his head. Something's off. I know, she said. I feel it too. What do you think it is? She looked at the display for a moment. At the 47 ships in their blockade formation. At the planet beneath them, patient and suffering. I think, she said slowly, that we were supposed to be part of the demonstration. Not just the cooperative's failure to respond. The human response. Our response. She paused. I think whoever set this up wanted to see what we would do. Wanted us to come here. Marcus went very still. A trap. Or a test, she said. And I can't tell yet which one. The diplomatic voice was, as Kren had said, the smallest vessel in the Keth fleet. It was still enormous. Sarah's shuttle, a two-person craft from the Resolute, small and fast and armed with exactly the same modest defensive systems that any Space Force shuttle carried, approached the diplomatic voice from the starboard side, and Sarah spent the approach looking at the ship through the viewport with the particular attention she gave to things that were important to understand. The vessel was built on the same general aesthetic as the other Keth ships she'd seen on the tactical display, dark materials, long lines, a design philosophy that prioritized function over beauty without being graceless. But up close there were details that the sensors hadn't captured. The hull had texture, not decorative but structural, layers of material that overlapped like scales or armor plates. The weapon ports were present but closed, and around each one was a ring of material in a slightly different shade that she identified, after a moment, as what happened to metal when it had been heated and cooled many times. Battle damage repaired. This was a ship that had been in fights. And it was the diplomatic vessel. How do you feel? She asked Thomas Park, who was in the pilot's seat beside her. Focused, he said. Then, a little scared. Good. Fear is information. What's it telling you? He thought about it. That this matters. That I should pay attention. Exactly right, she said. Pay attention to everything. Not just what they say. How they move, how they use the space, what they look at. You're going to see things I'll miss because I'll be focused on Dask. Remember them. Yes, Commander. The docking bay received them, a large space, well-lit, clean. A Keth crew member, one alone, deliberately unthreatening, guided the shuttle to a landing pad with practiced hand signals. As Sarah stepped off the shuttle, she noted the crew member's eyes. Bright, attentive, curious. Not hostile. Curious. She noted this. Kren met them at the bay entrance. Up close, he was shorter than she'd expected from a Keth, perhaps only 7.5 feet, which was apparently below average for his species, which might have explained something about a career in diplomacy rather than military command. He had the layered skin she'd read about, in shades of dark brown and gray, and 4 eyes arranged in a slightly different configuration than human eyes, 2 forward-facing, 2 at the sides, giving him peripheral vision that was probably nearly 360 degrees. He moved with the careful precision of someone very aware of being in a small space relative to their size. Commander Chin, he said, his voice much warmer in person than through the communication systems. The translation matrix had apparently lost some harmonic quality. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making this possible, she said. This is Ensign Thomas Park. Kren's side eyes moved briefly to Thomas, back to Sarah. I must tell you, Fleet Commander Dask is not easy. He is not a warm individual. He is direct, sometimes to the point of seeming hostile when he is not. Please, calibrate your responses accordingly. I appreciate the warning, Sarah said. He is also, Kren added, lower, genuinely conflicted. I have served with difficult commanders who were not conflicted. This one is. He does not enjoy being in this position. Neither do I, Sarah said. Maybe that's somewhere to start. Fleet Commander Dask was waiting in a conference room that had clearly been designed for beings significantly larger than humans. The chairs, if they could be called chairs, given that they were essentially curved platforms at roughly hip height for the Keth, were sized for 9-foot beings. Sarah and Thomas, both on the shorter side of average human height, sat in them with their feet not quite reaching the floor, which Sarah chose to treat as unremarkable. Dask was, in person, imposing in a way that the voice had not prepared her for. He was taller than Kren by a significant margin, his layered skin darker, his forward eyes a deep amber color that moved constantly, tracking, assessing the eyes of someone who had spent decades evaluating threats. His officer's insignia, worn across his chest on a diagonal sash, was marked with symbols that Kren had quietly told her indicated 3 decades of command service and a distinguished record. He was also clearly exhausted. Not in a way that most humans would have recognized, the Keth probably showed fatigue differently, but there was something in the set of his shoulders and the slightly slower blink rate of his forward eyes that registered, to someone paying attention, as the quality of a person who hadn't slept properly in a long time. Commander Chin, he said. The double harmonics were even more pronounced in person. Fleet Commander Dask, she said. Thank you for meeting me. A slight inclination of his head. Not quite a bow, more of an acknowledgement. He sat. She sat. Kren took a position slightly behind and to the side, the traditional position she recalled from her briefings, of a Keth diplomatic advisor when not speaking directly. Your proposal, Dask said. No preamble. The Kepler Accords. Resource sharing framework. Yes. I have read the documentation Kren provided. His eyes moved over her, not threateningly but thoroughly. It is not nothing. It is a legitimate framework. The financial projections for Keth Dominion participation in Kerite extraction, under the framework's most favorable terms, represent approximately 40% of the value we were sent here to secure outright. 40% legitimately is better than 100% illegitimately, Sarah said. Especially when the illegitimate acquisition was never going to work in the first place. Because of your fleet. Because of our fleet, yes. But also because the Cooperative Council was moving toward a response regardless. We accelerated the timeline. We didn't change the outcome. She paused. Fleet Commander, whoever told you that the Cooperative would not respond was either wrong or lying. I believe they were lying. Yes, he said. I have reached the same conclusion. They looked at each other for a moment. HFY, Thomas Park said quietly from beside her, and then stopped and went slightly red. Dask's forward eyes moved to Thomas. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, one of the amber eyes seemed to shift slightly, a physical expression she couldn't read. That phrase. What does it mean? Thomas looked mortified. It's an expression, sir. It means something like, after this, where do I go from here? It's used when someone is in a situation and they're trying to figure out the next step. Dask was quiet for a moment. There is a Keth expression with an approximately similar meaning. He said something in his own language, 2 syllables, layered, that the translation matrix rendered as forward from difficulty. It is used by soldiers. When the situation is clear but the path is not. That's exactly it, Thomas said. Dask looked at the young ensign for another moment. Then he turned back to Sarah. Your officer is young. He's learning, Sarah said. Aren't we all? The conversation went on for 3 hours. There were no dramatic moments in it. No ultimatums, no emotional outbursts, no sudden revelations. What there was 2 professional officers, a career diplomat and a very attentive young ensign, working through a complicated situation with a particular kind of careful honesty that happens when everyone in the room is tired of pretense. Dask confirmed what Kren had indicated. The orders had come through unofficial channels, routed through a series of intermediaries that made the original source difficult to trace. The Keth Dominion government, he believed, had been paid for the use of this fleet through those same unofficial channels. The payment had been substantial. The instruction had been framed as an economic opportunity, secure the Kerite rights and the payment is yours to keep. He had been given intelligence suggesting a minimal cooperative response. That intelligence had been deliberately falsified. Who gave you the false intelligence? Sarah asked. A source within the Cooperative Council, he said. Sarah was very still. You're certain? The intelligence was accurate in every detail except the one that mattered. It described the cooperative's response protocols precisely, too precisely for an outside source. Whoever provided it had access to internal cooperative documentation. He paused. I do not know their species or their name. The intermediary who gave it to me is dead. He died 3 weeks ago, which I found. His eyes moved. Suggestive. Someone killed the intermediary, Sarah said. Someone killed the intermediary, Dask agreed. She sat with this for a moment. An internal cooperative source. Someone with access to council documentation. Someone who had paid the Keth to blockade a colony, provided false intelligence to ensure the operation would go far enough to create the demonstration they wanted, and then eliminated the evidence. The 12 commanders who want to fight, she said. Are any of them receiving communication from outside your fleet that you're aware of? Dask's eyes went through a complicated movement. Why do you ask? Because the entity that set this up needs a fight to happen. They need us to engage your fleet. They need a battle that ends badly, either for us or for the colony or both, because the outcome demonstrates their point. If you stand down peacefully, they don't get their demonstration. She paused. And 12 of your commanders apparently want to fight. A very long silence. I had not considered that angle, Dask said slowly. I'd consider it now, Sarah said. Is it possible that those 12 commanders are also receiving outside direction? Another silence. Kren behind Dask had gone very still. It is possible, Dask said finally. If those channels exist, I would not necessarily know about them. Then we may have less time than we thought, Sarah said. Because if someone outside the system is directing part of your fleet, and they need a battle to happen, they have every incentive to make that battle happen before you and I reach an agreement. She stood. Fleet Commander. I need to go back to my ship. And I think you need to find out, quickly, what communication those 12 commanders have been receiving. Dask stood. At full height, he was truly remarkable, a being that had clearly been in wars and survived them, standing in the low light of his own ship with that quality of something that had been tested and held. You came here to see me in person, he said. Why? Because I needed to know who you actually are, she said. Not who your orders made you. His eyes moved. That shift again, the one she couldn't quite read. And I think you're someone who was put in an impossible position by people who don't care about you, and I think you're trying to find a way out of it that doesn't require anyone to die. She paused. I think we can do that. But we need to move quickly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, forward from difficulty, he said. Forward from difficulty, she agreed. She was back on the Resolute in 40 minutes, which was 20 minutes faster than it should have been, because Thomas flew the shuttle like it was on fire and she didn't complain once about the speed. Marcus, she said, stepping off the shuttle bay elevator onto the bridge. Status. 3 of the blockade vessels have repositioned since you left, he said immediately, already moving to the tactical display. Not all of them, 37 are still in the same blockade configuration. But 3 have moved to the outer edge of the formation. Farther from the planet. Closer to us, Sarah said. Yes. She looked at the display. 3 ships. She thought about 12 commanders who wanted a fight. 3 had moved. 9 hadn't. Either 9 were biding their time, or 3 were the ones directly receiving outside direction and the other 9 were genuinely just aggressive rather than actively manipulated. Either way, 3 ships moving out of formation was not a good sign. Get me Dask, she said. The channel opened. Dask's voice came through before she could speak. I see it, he said. Commander 3 Veth. He has been in communication with an outside party. I found the channel logs. He has been receiving encrypted signals for 2 weeks. I do not have the decryption key. Does he command the other 2 ships that moved? Yes. Commanders 7 and 12 serve under his direct command, a subformation within the fleet. If he acts, they act with him. What are his orders? Unknown. But the pattern of the signals suggests a trigger, a conditional instruction. Do something when a certain event occurs. What event? Pause. I believe the event is you returning to your ship. Sarah looked at the 3 repositioned vessels on the display. He's going to attack. Possibly us. Possibly you. Possibly both. Can you stop him? I can order him to stand down. Whether he obeys. A longer pause. Veth is a loyalist to the faction that sent us here. He will follow their instructions over mine. Then we need to take the choice away from him, Sarah said. She turned to Marcus. Tactical. If those 3 ships engage us, what's the outcome? Marcus was already running it. 3 against 1. If they engage us alone, we take significant damage but they don't win. If the other 44 hold position, we eventually subdue the 3. He paused. But the 3 have repositioned to a firing angle that also covers the colony's upper atmosphere. If they fire on us and we maneuver, there's a chance their shots miss us and hit the planet. A chance. A significant chance, he said. They know that. Sarah understood. If Commander 3 Veth engaged the Resolute, he wasn't trying to destroy just one ship. He was creating a situation where any maneuver Sarah made to protect her ship risked the colony. It was a hostage situation built out of physics and firing angles. Brilliant in a brutal way. And it was the demonstration, this was it, right here. A human ship, forced to choose between protecting itself and protecting the colony. Either the Resolute got hit or the colony took collateral fire. Either way, someone suffered. Either way, the cooperative's failure, humanity's failure, to protect what it claimed to protect was demonstrated. Get Admiral Foster, she said. Now. The Admiral's face appeared on her display within seconds. He was clearly already watching the situation develop. Chin. 3 hostile ships repositioned. Commander 3 Veth, subformation under Fleet Commander Dask. I believe they're operating under direct outside instruction and are about to attempt an attack. The firing angle covers the colony. I see it. Foster's face was composed. Behind him she could hear the sounds of his own bridge going active. Recommendations. We need to move the fleet to intercept those 3 ships without provoking the rest of the blockade. If we bring all 53 ships forward, we trigger a general engagement. If we bring nothing, the 3 ships attack and we're alone. She thought quickly. A limited force, enough to neutralize 3 hostile ships without looking like a full assault on the blockade. 6 ships, maybe 8. Positioned to block their firing angle on the colony, not to attack them directly. You want to physically interpose ships between them and the planet? Yes, sir. That puts those ships in the line of fire if Veth opens up. It also makes it unambiguous that the first shots are being fired at a humanitarian convoy in defense of a blockade that's already been condemned by the Cooperative Council. Veth loses the narrative the second he fires on ships that are positioned between him and a planet full of civilians. She paused. Assuming anyone is watching. Someone is always watching, Foster said. Caro. 6 ships, my choice. They're moving now. Hold your position and keep the channel to Dask open. Understood, Admiral. The channel closed. On the tactical display, 6 human ships broke from the main fleet formation, 4 destroyers and 2 frigates, compact and fast, and began moving to intercept. Not toward the 3 hostile Keth ships. Between them and the planet. A shield, not a sword. Sarah opened the channel to Dask again. Fleet Commander. We are interposing 6 vessels between Veth's formation and the colony. They are not armed offensively for this position. They are there to protect the planet. I want you to see that. I see it, Dask said. And his voice had a quality she was beginning to learn to recognize, that shift in the harmonics that indicated something complicated was happening in his thinking. He will see it too. Good. I want him to see it. What? It narrows his options. Exactly. She paused. Kren told me that you were unwilling to serve the purposes of the entity that sent you here. Commander Veth is their representative in your fleet. If he attacks now, at ship's position to protect a civilian colony, he makes clear to everyone watching what this operation was really about. And everyone watching includes the rest of your fleet. She paused. Including the 7 commanders who already agreed with your assessment. Silence for a moment. You are hoping that watching Veth attack a protective formation will break the uncertain commanders toward me, Dask said slowly. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping Veth sees those 6 ships and understands that the plan has failed and the smart move is to stand down. She paused. But yes. If he attacks, I believe your fleet fractures and I believe it fractures in your favor. You are wagering 6 ships and their crews on that belief. I'm wagering, she said carefully, on the decency of the majority of your officers when they see clearly what's being asked of them. Another silence. Then quietly, that is either very foolish or very wise. Ask me again in 20 minutes, she said. Commander 3 Veth held his position for 11 minutes. They were 11 of the longest minutes Sarah had experienced in her career, and she had experienced some memorable ones. The bridge was silent except for the constant murmur of systems and the occasional terse exchange between crew members. The tactical display showed 6 human ships in their protective arc, 3 Keth ships in their aggressive repositioning, and 44 Keth ships in a blockade formation that was, she watched carefully, not moving, holding, waiting. At the 11-minute mark, one of the 44 blockade ships moved. Then 2 more. Sarah watched the display very still. "They're not moving toward us," Marcus said, his voice controlled but carrying a note of something. "They're moving toward Veth's formation." 3 Keth ships from the main blockade were moving toward Commander 3 Veth's position. Not in a protective formation, in an intercept pattern. Blocking position between Veth and the human ships protecting the colony. "Dask," Sarah said. 7 commanders, he said. "The 7 who agreed with my assessment. They moved without being ordered. I did not ask them to do this. They made their own choice." "Yes." She watched the display. 3 human ships in protective position around the colony. 3 Keth ships moving to intercept Veth. The math for Veth had just changed dramatically. He was no longer looking at 1 human patrol cruiser as his immediate opposition. He was looking at his own fleet turning against him. The 11-minute mark became 15 minutes. 20. The 3 hostile ships did not fire. Did not advance. At the 23-minute mark, they began moving back toward the blockade formation. Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding for a very long time. "Contact from Veth's ship," Okafor said, his voice carefully flat. "Text only. No voice. Addressed to Fleet Commander Dask." "What does it say?" Sarah asked. Okafor read it. "The operation has been compromised. I am standing down pending further instruction. Do not mistake this for surrender." She looked at Marcus. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Thomas Park from the sensor station said quietly, "HFY. That's what that is, right? That's someone trying to figure out where they go from here." Sarah looked at her youngest officer. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what that is." The supply convoy began its approach to Kepler 442b 48 hours later. Not immediately, there was still the matter of formally documenting the end of the blockade, which required communication with the Cooperative Council, which required patience, which was not Sarah's strongest quality but which she managed. There was also the matter of the Kepler Accords framework that Dask had agreed in principle to support, which meant a formal application process, which meant more documentation, which Kren handled with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been waiting for the opportunity to do actual diplomatic work rather than stand in a room while a military commander threatened innocent people. And there was the matter of who had set this up. That hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown heavier as the immediate crisis receded, because the immediate crisis had a solution and the deeper problem did not. Someone inside the Cooperative Council had provided false intelligence to the Keth. Someone inside the cooperative had, potentially, been willing to let 3 million people starve and a human fleet get ambushed, to make a point about the cooperative's weakness. That someone was still there. Still had access. Still was watching. Sarah sent everything she had to Admiral Foster, who sent it to Space Force Intelligence, who sent it to the cooperative's own security apparatus, or rather, to the members of the security apparatus they trusted, which turned out to be a narrower list than anyone was comfortable with. She also, on a private channel, sent it to Counselor Mira, the silver-scaled Sarati who had argued 30 years ago that humanity would surprise them. Who had been right, just not in the way she'd imagined. Counselor Mira's response came back in 8 hours. It was brief. "I know who it is," she wrote. "I have known for 3 weeks. I have been gathering evidence because naming a council member without sufficient evidence is not how justice works, regardless of how clearly one sees the truth. The evidence is now sufficient. Thank you for what you've done here, Commander. The council will handle the rest." Sarah read this message twice. Then she read the name that Counselor Mira had attached. She went very still for a very long moment. Then she forwarded the name to Admiral Foster with a single line, "Sir, you need to see this." The supply convoy's approach was not dramatic. There were no cheering crowds on the colony's surface. The Vreth didn't express joy that way, and in any case, 40 supply ships delivering food and medicine was a logistical operation, not a celebration. It required coordination, landing pads, distribution networks, communications between the ship captains and the colony's resource management systems. It required hours of work by hundreds of people on both ends. But there was a moment. Just one. When the first supply ship, a broad, ungainly freighter named the Eleanor Park, crewed by 16 humans and packed to capacity with food, touched down on Kepler 442b's primary landing field, Counselor Bresch of the colony was there to meet it. Sarah watched it on a live feed from a camera the colony had set up for the occasion. The Vreth Elder stood in the slightly higher gravity of her world, her carapace catching the light of the Kepler sun, different from Earth's sun, yellower, stronger, and when the cargo doors of the Eleanor Park opened and the first pallets of food began moving down the loading ramps, Counselor Bresch did something that Sarah had never seen a Vreth do. She bowed. Not the formal inclined head acknowledgement that Vreth used among themselves. A deep bow, full body, both pairs of arms spread wide, the kind that, in Vreth culture, was reserved for moments of profound personal significance. Then she turned, and Sarah could see her speaking, and the colony's own cameras translated for the cooperative broadcast. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Sarah watched this in her quarters, alone, with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in response to something work-related since the Kerrigan Nebula incident, and she wasn't going to start now. But there was something that happened in her chest when she watched that Vreth elder bow, something that wasn't quite an emotion but was adjacent to several of them at once. She was a military officer. She commanded weapons and drove warships and made tactical decisions that, if she was wrong, got people killed. That was the job. That was what she'd signed up for, what she'd trained for, what she'd given the better part of her life to. But sometimes, not often but sometimes, the warships weren't the point. The warships were just the thing that made the other thing possible. The supply ships landing. The food unloading. The counselor bowing. Her communicator chimed. Thomas Park. Commander. Are you watching the feed? Yes. Pause. I know it probably seems small to you, Commander. After everything. But it doesn't seem small to me, Thomas. Another pause. I've been thinking about what you said. About the warships being there to make sure the supplies got through. I thought I understood it when you said it. I understand it better now. Good, she said. That's good. What happens now? With the person on the council, the one counselor Mira identified. That's above my pay grade, Sarah said. My job was the system. Other people's jobs are the next part. She paused. But it happens. Slowly, probably. With documentation and evidence and process, because that's how it should happen. She took a sip of cold coffee and made a face. Justice isn't usually fast. Does that frustrate you? She thought about it. Sometimes. But the alternative is worse. She set down the coffee. Get some sleep, Ensign. We'll have debrief in 6 hours. Yes, ma'am. She sat in the quiet for a while longer, watching the supply ships land. 3 days into the supply operation, Fleet Commander Dask requested a final meeting. Not in person this time, a communication channel, formal, with Kren present as the record keeper on his end. A closing conversation. The kind that tidied the edges of a situation that was ending. Commander Chin, he said. The Kepler Accords application has been formally submitted. Kren will handle the subsequent process. I know. I've been copied on the documents. The 12 commanders who favored engagement have accepted my authority. 3 of them, including Commander 3 Veth, have requested to speak with cooperative investigators regarding the instructions they received. Sarah absorbed this. Veth is cooperating? He appears to have reconsidered his position upon learning the identity of the entity directing him. Pause. The name Counselor Mira has forwarded, it was known to some of my commanders. Known and not approved of. The name is someone they recognize. Asterisk. The name is someone whose actions apparently extend beyond this system. Veth is a loyalist, but he is not, it appears, loyal to everyone who asked for his loyalty. He drew certain lines. Asterisk. Sarah thought about this for a moment. About how lines get drawn. How people with loyalty to something make choices, sometimes late, sometimes at cost, about where that loyalty ends. Fleet Commander, she said. What will happen to you when you go back? A long pause. I will present the Kepler Accords application as the result of my mission. It is not what I was sent to achieve, but it has a number attached to it and it represents a real gain for the Dominion. Whether that is sufficient. He paused. Forward from difficulty, Commander. That is all any of us can do. Forward from difficulty, she agreed. Another pause. I have one question, he said. Go ahead. Why did you come to my ship? Personally. You could have negotiated this from the safety of your own vessel. Why take the risk? She thought about how to answer this. There were several honest answers and she chose the most honest one. Because I needed you to see me as a person, she said. Not a voice. Not a tactical problem. A person. And I needed to see you the same way. She paused. You can't really trust someone you've only heard through a translation matrix. You can assess them. You can make tactical judgments about them. But trust requires something more than that. She paused again. I wanted us to trust each other enough to find a solution. And I was willing to take the risk that required. A very long silence. In Keth culture, Dask said slowly, there is a concept, not well translated, for a person who demonstrates their sincerity through action rather than words. A person who does the thing rather than claiming to be the kind of person who does the thing. What's the word for it? He said something in Keth, 3 syllables, layered, resonant. The translation matrix offered, one who walks forward. I'll take it, Sarah said. You have earned it, Dask said. Farewell, Commander Chin. Farewell, Fleet Commander. Safe travels. The channel closed. Sarah sat back in her chair and looked at the display showing the steady, unglamorous progress of 40 supply ships delivering what they'd come to deliver. The debriefing lasted 4 days. This was not unusual. Significant military operations always generated more paperwork than the operations themselves, a fact of institutional life that Sarah had made her peace with years ago. 4 days of debriefing for what had been, at various moments, a first contact situation, a diplomatic negotiation, a near military engagement, and a criminal investigation was, if anything, relatively efficient. The sessions were held aboard the UES Judgment, Admiral Foster's flagship, in a conference room that was considerably more comfortable than any room Sarah had sat in for the past 3 weeks. Foster ran the debrief himself for the first 2 days, joined on the 3rd and 4th by representatives from Space Force Intelligence, the Cooperative Council's investigative arm, and a legal team from the Earth government that was present to observe and say very little. Sarah told everything she knew. So did Marcus, Thomas, Okafor, and the other senior officers who had been involved. So, via secure channel, did Kren, who had already submitted a formal report of his own to both the Cooperative Council and the Keth Dominion government, a report that was apparently creating significant disruption in several political circles simultaneously. On the 3rd day the name was officially released. Councillor Vethran of the Durathi people. A 12-year member of the Cooperative Council. A respected voice on trade policy. A species, the Durathi, who were, on paper, one of the cooperative's most stable and reliable members. Quietly wealthy, industrially powerful, with significant holdings in rare mineral processing. Carite, it turned out, was essential not just for human FTL drives but for the Durathi industrial base as well. They had their own sources, but those sources were aging and increasingly expensive to maintain. The Vreth colony's Carite deposits, under the control of a desperate colony willing to accept whatever terms were offered, would have been worth an almost incalculable sum. And more than that, the Durathi had been watching humanity's rise in the cooperative with what could be generously described as concern. 31 years of watching a species that had been considered a curiosity turn into the cooperative's most reliable military force. 31 years of watching the human space force grow. Of watching human technology, crude in some respects, startlingly advanced in others, integrate with cooperative systems and improve them. Of watching the Cooperative Council grant humanity more and more influence, more and more formal status, more and more participation. Councillor Vethran had wanted a demonstration. Not of the cooperative's weakness, or rather not only that. A demonstration of humanity's limits. Proof that the Space Force, for all its impressive growth, could not be everywhere. Could not respond to everything. Could not protect every colony in every corner of the galaxy. That was the real message. The thing meant to be seen by every species on the fence about whether to trust the cooperative's human partners. The demonstration had failed. Councillor Vethran was arrested by Cooperative Security Services on the 4th day of the debrief. Sarah was not present for the arrest. She was in a session reviewing tactical communications from the engagement period, but she was told about it within the hour. She received the news with a calm that she recognized, after a moment, as the calm of someone who has been waiting for something and is now receiving confirmation that it happened. Not surprise. Not relief exactly. Just a settling, the feeling of a loose thread being tucked away. How do you feel about it? Thomas asked her when they were both off duty that evening, sitting in the Judgment's small officers' lounge with drinks that were not coffee, which was a welcome change. Sarah considered the question. I feel like a very smart, very dangerous person made a very strategic calculation and was wrong about one variable. Which variable? Us. She turned her glass slowly. They calculated that we wouldn't respond fast enough. That 53 warships turning up in 6 weeks was outside the range of plausible outcomes. They designed the whole operation around a version of the Space Force that existed maybe 15 years ago. She paused. That's the thing about underestimating people. You're usually working from old data. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Do you think there are others? Other counselors? Other plans? Probably, she said honestly. Maybe not like this one. This was bold, and bold plans that fail tend to discourage imitators. But people with this kind of motivation don't usually stop having it just because one operation didn't work. She looked at her drink. That's why we keep building ships. Is that enough? She thought about Counselor Bresch's bow. About the Eleanor Park's cargo doors opening. About 3 million people who were going to be hungry for a while longer, but who were going to be alive and eventually fed, and who still had their planet and their care right and their dignity. I think, she said slowly, that ships are a means to an end. They're the thing that lets you get somewhere in time to matter. But the thing that's actually enough, that's harder. She paused. I think it's being the kind of people who go. When it costs something. When the math doesn't clearly favor success. When it would be easier to wait and see. She set down her glass. HFY, after this where do we go? We go to the next place that needs us. That's what's enough. Not the ships. The going. Thomas was quiet for a long time. I want to command a ship someday, he said. I've always wanted to. But I didn't know until this, what that meant. Not really. Now you do. Yeah. He looked at his drink. Now I do. Aboard the Keth diplomatic vessel, Sector Voice Kren was composing his official report. He had been composing it in fragments for the past week, jotting notes between meetings, filing observations, building the structure of an account that would, he knew, be read carefully by people in the Keth government who were still figuring out what had happened here and what it meant for their relationship with the cooperative and with humanity specifically. He was a precise person. He believed in precision. He believed in the value of a well-constructed account, because a well-constructed account outlasted the moment and shaped what came after. He wrote about Fleet Commander Dask, about a military officer who had been handed an impossible mission by people who expected him to be used up in it, and who had chosen, in the end, a different path. About a decision made not from fear of defeat but from a clear-eyed understanding of what winning at this particular cost would actually mean. He wrote about Commander Sarah Chin. About a human officer who had boarded a foreign ship voluntarily, alone with one junior officer, in the middle of a standoff, because she believed the conversation could happen if she was willing to have it in person. About what that kind of courage looked like from across the table. He wrote about Ensign Thomas Park, who had said HFY without meaning to, and in doing so had named something that every person in that room had been feeling, the universal experience of standing at the far edge of difficulty, looking forward, trying to find the next step. And he wrote, finally, about the supply ship's landing. About the Eleanor Park touching down on Kepler 442b's surface. About what 40 ships full of food meant to 3 million people who had been running out. He had seen a great many things in 30 years of diplomatic service. He had been present at treaty signings and at breakdowns. At moments when civilizations chose to reach toward each other and moments when they chose to pull away. He thought that this specific thing that had happened in the Kepler system was worth writing down carefully. Not because it was perfect or easy or without its darkness, but because something had happened here that he didn't have a word for in his own language. He found a human phrase for it in the end from something Thomas Park had said. Forward from difficulty. He wrote it at the top of his report above his own name and left it there. 6 months later. Nairobi. The United Earth Space Force headquarters complex, which occupied a sprawling campus on the outskirts of the city and which, in the 41 years since it had been built, had expanded from 2 buildings to 17 without ever quite managing to look like a planned campus rather than a collection of structures that had arrived at adjacency by accident. Sarah Chin sat in the office of Admiral David Foster and was offered a promotion. She turned it down. Commander, Foster said, with the particular patience of a man who had been through this specific conversation before and knew better than to push too hard too fast. The position is Admiral of the Third Fleet. It would mean. I know what it would mean, she said. An office, meetings, strategic planning, influence over fleet operations across 4 sectors. She paused. I'm 44 years old, sir. I've been doing this for 22 years. I'm not ready to move into an office. You'd still have a ship. A flagship nominally. But most of my time would be on stations and in council chambers. She looked at him steadily. Sir, you sent me to Kepler 442b because I was there and you trusted my judgment. I was there because I was on the Resolute doing patrol work. If I take this promotion, the next Commander Chin doesn't exist, because there's no senior officer in the Resolute's role making that call. Foster was quiet for a moment. You're arguing for your own demotion through logic. I'm arguing for the value of experienced officers in field positions, she said. Which is a different thing. Sir. He studied her for a long moment. Then he sat back in his chair with the expression of a man conceding a point while reserving the right to raise it again later. The Resolute is going into refit, he said. 6 months minimum. New systems, updated weapons, expanded medical bay. You'd be shore-based for the duration. I know. What are you going to do with 6 months on the ground? She had thought about this. I've been asked to consult with the Cooperative Council's new security working group. The one investigating how Vethran operated for 12 years without detection. And, she paused. I've been asked to consult on the design specifications for the new generation patrol cruisers. Apparently someone noticed that the Resolute managed to hold position in a hostile system against 47 ships for a week, and they want to know why the small ship worked. I know why the small ship worked, Foster said. So do I, she said. But I can probably articulate it in ways that are useful for engineers. He almost smiled. Fine. He picked up a data pad. There's one more thing. The Vreth colony has requested that a Space Force vessel be formally assigned to the Kepler system on a rotating basis. Not permanently, 6-month rotations. They want a presence there while their agricultural systems recover and while the Kepler Accords process works through its initial implementation period. That makes sense. The first rotation slot is open. I thought you might want first choice of which vessel takes it. She thought about the Kepler system. About the planet below the blockade. About Counselor Bresch and her bow. The Iron Hand, she said. Captain Kowalski. He got there without authorization because he thought it was the right thing to do. He should see what the right thing accomplished. Foster made a note. Done. He set down the data pad. Commander Chin. For what it's worth, and I know you'll argue about this too, what you did in that system was one of the finest pieces of work I've seen in 40 years of service. The engagement tactics, holding position with one ship against 47, the controlled escalation, the direct boarding of the Keth vessel. But more than the tactics. The thing with Dask. He paused. You knew he could be reached. I thought he could be, she said. There was a difference. Not much of one in the moment. She was quiet for a second. I've learned, over the years, that most people who are on the wrong side of a situation didn't choose it as freely as it looks like they did. Dask was given false intelligence and impossible orders by people who intended to waste him. Once he understood that, the question was whether he had the character to respond to the truth. She paused. I bet on his character. It worked. It doesn't always work. What do you do when it doesn't? You fight, she said simply. But you try the other thing first. Researcher Yethkara was back at work. She had been back at work, technically, within 2 weeks of her return to the colony, because she was Vreth, and Vreth did not rest easily when there was work to be done, and the work of understanding what had been done to her colony's agricultural systems and how to prevent it from happening again was pressing and important and exactly the kind of challenge her mind was built for. But she had also, in the months since her return, done something that was not work. She had sent a message to Commander Sarah Chin. It had taken her 3 drafts to write, because she was a scientist and not a writer, and because what she wanted to say was complicated in ways that her species' formal communication traditions didn't quite accommodate. She had eventually written it in the informal register, the way you wrote to someone you considered, in some sense, known, which was itself a statement about how she understood their relationship. Commander Chin. I was told what you said to the fleet commander's diplomat. That releasing me was not a negotiating point. That it was a precondition. I want to tell you something. I am a scientist. I study living systems. How they grow, how they fail, what makes them resilient. I have spent my career looking at the mechanisms of life, the processes that allow organisms to survive damage, to adapt, to persist. What happened here, in this system, over these months, it was a kind of system. And it failed in the way that systems fail when the wrong stresses are applied in the wrong places. Our crops. Our supply lines. Our ability to call for help. But it also recovered in the way that systems recover when the right intervention arrives at the right moment. You were the right intervention. I do not mean the ships, though the ships mattered. I mean the quality of how you did it. The choice to speak before fighting. The choice to trust Dask's character when it would have been safer to assume the worst. The choice to board a ship full of people who might have been your enemies because you needed the conversation to be real. I study resilience in living systems. What you demonstrated is what resilience looks like in people. I wanted you to know that I see it. And that I am grateful for it. Researcher Yethkara, Kepler Agricultural Sciences Institute. Sarah had read this message on the shuttle from Nairobi to her apartment in Mombasa, on a gray Tuesday afternoon with rain spotted on the window. She had read it twice. Then she had put the communicator in her bag and looked out the window at the clouds over the Indian Ocean and thought about resilience. She wrote back that evening. Researcher Yethkara, thank you for writing. I've thought about you often, about what it must have been like to be in that situation, and how you managed to keep broadcasting despite the risk. The intervention, as you call it, worked because people on both sides of the blockade made decisions based on something more than self-interest. You kept trying to communicate. Kren told me the truth. Dask chose not to serve the purposes of people who were using him. The 7 commanders who moved their ships to intercept Veth, they made that choice without being ordered to. I showed up. But so did a lot of other people. That's the part that actually makes systems resilient, I think. Not one person arriving at the right moment, but the distributed choices of enough people who, when it comes to it, decide to do the right thing. I hope your research goes well. I hope the colony is recovering. I hope, someday, to visit Kepler 442b in circumstances significantly less dramatic than the last time I was in your neighborhood. Commander Sarah Chen, U.S. Resolute, currently in refit. P.S. One of my officers tells me that the Keth equivalent of forward from difficulty is now used as a kind of motto by some of the crews in this system. I can't verify that. But if it's true, I find it appropriate. 1 year later. The U.S. Resolute came out of refit looking, to Sarah's eye, like the same ship wearing a new suit. Same bones. Same character. But everything underneath had been upgraded. New power systems, faster sensor arrays, an expanded medical bay that Dr. Patel had personally overseen and which she described as finally adequate, and weapon systems that Marcus had looked at for the first time and gone very quiet in a way that Sarah had learned to read as approval. The commissioning ceremony was brief, practical, and attended by the crew plus a handful of senior officers, plus one unexpected guest. Ensign Thomas Park, now, as of 3 months ago, Lieutenant Thomas Park, was at the ceremony in his new rank insignia, looking slightly uncomfortable in the formal uniform and considerably more comfortable behind it. He had spent the refit period training at Space Force Academy's Advanced Tactical Program, which he had completed with the kind of marks that meant his instructors had sent notes to Admiral Foster expressing opinions about his future. Foster had shared those notes with Sarah. She had read them and felt something she chose not to over-examine, which was probably pride of the variety that a mentor felt, which was a relationship she hadn't intended to have with Thomas Park but which had apparently happened anyway. The ceremony included a small delegation from the Vreth colony on Kepler 442b. Counselor Bresch had sent 3 representatives, who attended via holographic link and who presented, formally and with considerable ceremony, a recognition from the colony to the Resolute and her crew. The recognition was a Vreth custom, a kind of formal acknowledgement of debt that wasn't quite debt, more like a permanent record of connection. The Vreth word for it translated approximately as remembered together. Sarah accepted it on behalf of the crew with a formality she hoped matched the significance the Vreth attached to it. Kren was there too, also via link. He was currently assigned to the Cooperative Council's ongoing investigation into the Dorothy affair, which was proceeding slowly and producing a great deal of documentation. He had grown, she thought, watching him on the link, into someone who wore the knowledge of what he'd done in the Kepler system as a kind of quiet distinction. He had always been a professional. Now he was something slightly more than that. A person who had, when it mattered, told the truth. Fleet Commander Dask was not there, and had not sent a message, which was fully consistent with Keth custom and which Sarah took no offense at whatsoever. She knew that he was dealing with the aftermath of the operation within the Keth Dominion political structure, and she suspected that aftermath was an understatement for what was happening in those internal conversations. But the Kepler Accords process was moving forward, and Kren had told her quietly that Dask's handling of the situation was being acknowledged, in the way that Keth acknowledged things, which was not through ceremony but through the expansion of operational authority, the kind of trust granted to officers who had demonstrated judgment. He was, in other words, going to be okay. She found that she was glad about this in a way she hadn't entirely expected. After the ceremony, she stood on the Resolute's bridge alone for a while. Not because she was avoiding anyone, the crew was at a celebration in the mess which she would join shortly, but because there was something she needed to do alone, which was simply to stand here and feel the ship around her. It was the same ship. She had commanded it for 6 years. She knew the sound of its engines at different power levels, the particular hum of the air circulation system that was slightly different on the port side than the starboard, the way the deck plates felt slightly different in the 3 sections that had been replaced 2 years ago. She knew this ship the way you knew a place you lived in, not consciously most of the time but with a deep physical familiarity that was its own kind of knowledge. She thought about the last year. The investigation into Counselor Vethran was ongoing and would be for some time. 12 years of quiet manipulation left a lot of threads to untangle. 3 other Dorothy operatives had been identified and removed from positions of influence. The Dorothy people, The species as a whole, the vast majority of them who had nothing to do with their counselor's schemes, were navigating a moment of collective reckoning, the kind that happened when a respected figure turned out to have been deeply other than what they seemed. It was a painful process and probably a necessary one, and Sarah felt a complicated sympathy for the ordinary Dorothy who hadn't known and were now dealing with the consequences of what they hadn't known. The Vreth colony was recovering. Slowly but consistently. Yethkara had sent 2 more messages, both brief, both updating Sarah on the agricultural recovery progress. The resistant crop strains that had been brought in as part of the supply convoy were taking hold, the native soil ecology was stabilizing, the first post-crisis harvest was projected for 3 months from now and the projections were good. Not as good as pre-crisis but good enough. A foundation to build from. Thomas Park had been assigned as the Resolute's new tactical officer, replacing Marcus Webb, who had finally accepted a posting he'd been offered 3 times and taken command of his own vessel. A destroyer, the UES Decisive, which suited him in ways that made Sarah feel that the universe occasionally managed to arrange things appropriately. She had a new XO. A no-nonsense woman named Commander Adiz Nwosu, who had come from the Cooperative Liaison Division and who had, among other qualifications, more experience with alien cultures than anyone else in Sarah's chain of command. She was going to be excellent. Sarah was sure of this in the way she was usually sure of important things. Not because she had all the evidence yet, but because the evidence she had pointed in a very clear direction. She stood on the bridge of the Resolute and looked at the viewport, which currently showed the interior of the orbital dock, scaffolding, dock workers, the mundane infrastructure of a working spaceport. In 6 hours, the ship would undock and begin its transit to the Kepler system, where it would take up the patrol rotation that the Iron Hand was completing after its 6 months of duty. She would see Kepler 442b again. Would probably meet Counselor Bresch in person. Would probably visit the colony, see the recovery with her own eyes. She found that she was looking forward to this in a way that wasn't tactical or professional. Just looking forward to it. The way you looked forward to returning to a place that had become, somehow, without planning or intention, meaningful to you. Her communicator chimed. Thomas? Commander? They're asking about you in the mess. I'll be there in a minute, she said. Also there's cake. Dr. Patel made it. It's green, which I think means it's Vreth-inspired, which is either very thoughtful or very alarming. Probably both, Sarah said. Save me a piece. She took one more moment on the bridge. Looked at the empty command chair. Looked at the viewport. Looked at the tactical display, dark and quiet, waiting. Then she went to join her crew. 5 years later. The Cooperative Council chambers were not designed for drama. They were designed for function. A large, circular room with tiered seating for the member species representatives, an acoustic system that managed the considerable challenge of many different languages and many different vocal configurations existing in the same space, and lighting that had been calibrated, after years of complaint, to be reasonably comfortable for the 12 most common visual systems represented in the Council. They were not, in other words, a beautiful room. But they were an important one. Today they were more crowded than usual. The vote on Earth's formal membership in the Cooperative Council. Not observer status, not associate membership, not the careful, limited participation that humanity had been exercising for 31 years, but full voting membership with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed, had been on the agenda for the past year. It had been debated, scrutinized, contested, supported, amended, contested again, and eventually reached this day with what the political analysts were describing as a significant majority in favor. Sarah Chin was not in the chamber for the vote. She was, at that moment, aboard the UES Resolute, currently in standard patrol of the outer sectors, because the Resolute's patrol schedule did not pause for political events, however significant. She watched the vote live on the ship's communication system, on the small screen in her ready room, with Thomas Park and Adiz Nwosu present, and with a cup of coffee that was, for once, actually hot. The vote passed. Earth became a full voting member of the Galactic Cooperative, 36 years after first contact, 6 years after a blockade in the Kepler system that nobody who had been watching the Cooperative's deliberations had expected anyone to respond to. Thomas opened his mouth. Sarah held up a hand. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to say anything, Commander. You were going to say something about the warships. He paused. Maybe. Go ahead then. He grinned, and there was something in that grin that she recognized as the residue of the boy who had said HFY without meaning to, and the emerging shape of the officer he was becoming. They expected supplies, he said. We brought warships. We brought supplies too, Adiz said. Eventually, Thomas agreed. After the warships cleared the way. That's usually how it works, Sarah said. She looked at the screen where the council chamber was showing the kind of organized controlled celebration that diplomatically diverse groups managed. No one jumping or shouting, but a quality of relief and forward motion in the room that read clearly even across a transmission delay. People ask sometimes whether humanity should have pushed for this sooner. Whether we were too cautious, taking 36 years to go from first contact to full membership. What do you think? Adiz asked. I think we needed those 36 years to figure out what we were becoming, Sarah said. The cooperative had a theory about us. That we were warlike but redeemable. That given time and peace and resources, we'd evolve into something more cooperative. She looked at the screen. I don't think we evolved. I think we were always what we are. They just didn't understand what we were yet. What are we? Thomas asked. She thought about it for a moment. We're the people who go, she said. When it's expensive. When it's risky. When the math doesn't clearly favor going. When it would be easier to wait and deliberate and let someone else handle it. She paused. We build warships because we understand that sometimes you need to be able to enforce a principle. But we built those warships so we could get to places fast enough to matter, and when we get there, we try to talk first. She picked up her coffee. That's not evolution. That's just who we've always been. The cooperative is figuring that out. The screen showed Counselor Mira, silver-scaled, ancient by some standards, the Sarah T who had argued 36 years ago that humanity would surprise them, casting her vote. Affirmative. Sarah watched the old counselor's face on the screen. There was something there, a quality that, across species and translation systems and decades, read clearly as the expression of a person who has waited a long time for something they believed in to happen, and who is now watching it happen. She thought about what Counselor Mira had said, those 36 years ago, in the debate that had determined Earth's initial relationship with the cooperative. Give them time. Give them trade. Give them friendship. They will surprise you. She hadn't been wrong. The Resolute continued its patrol. The outer sectors were vast and complex and full of the kind of situations that didn't make headlines but that mattered enormously to the people involved in them. Resource disputes, colonial tensions, shipping conflicts, the endless small negotiations and occasional confrontations of a galaxy full of different species trying to coexist. The patrol cruiser and its crew moved through these situations with a particular combination of force and restraint and relentless willingness to communicate that had, by this point, become recognizable to most of the species in the cooperative as a characteristically human approach. They came. They talked. They listened. They held firm when firmness was necessary and flexible when flexibility was possible. They went home and came back. Thomas Park was 28 years old, and his record was the kind that generated notes from instructors and raised eyebrows and promotion boards, and Sarah was increasingly clear that she was holding on to him slightly longer than was strictly optimal for his career development because he was excellent and she wasn't entirely ready to let excellent go. She acknowledged this to herself without being particularly disturbed by it. She would recommend him for his own command when the timing was right, and the timing was almost right. Adiz Nwosu had, somewhere in the past year, become essential in ways that weren't immediately quantifiable but that Sarah felt in the quality of decisions made and problems anticipated. She had a gift for reading rooms, alien rooms, human rooms, rooms where the species involved had not previously attempted sustained cooperation, that complemented Sarah's approach in the way that the best working relationships did, by covering the gaps without the gap covering needing to be arranged. Dr. Priya Patel had expanded the medical bay twice more since the refit and was an ongoing publication about the physiological effects of extended deep space patrol on human biology, a research area she conducted while also running the ship's full medical operations, which was the kind of professional intensity that Sarah had long since stopped finding surprising in her. Elena Vasquez was on her third engine redesign project, pursuing some optimization she wouldn't explain to anyone except other engineers and which she swore would reduce fuel consumption by 15%, which several senior engineers at Space Force headquarters said was impossible, which was exactly the kind of statement that motivated Elena. James Okafor had taken a shore posting, a communications research position at the Cooperative Academy, where he was working on improving the translation matrix used by every vessel in the fleet. The improved version, when it was released, would be called the Okafor Protocol and Internal Documentation, though Okafor himself kept describing it as a team effort, which was true and which was also exactly the kind of thing Okafor would say. The crew of the Resolute changed, slowly as crews did, people coming and going, new faces learning the ship's particular rhythms, the sound of the engines and the portside air circulation and the deck plates that had been replaced and hadn't quite matched. The ship itself was the constant. Not in a romantic way. In a functional way. The ship was what made the going possible. On a Tuesday in the 7th year of Sarah Chen's command of the UES Resolute, which was, for the record, the longest continuous command tenure in Space Force history for a vessel of that class, a distinction she was aware of and didn't mention, the ship dropped out of FTL at the edge of a small system in the outer sectors and received a signal. It was not a distress signal. It was not a blockade situation. It was not a crisis requiring military intervention. It was a colony, cooperative members, a species called the Ferrith, who were broadly speaking pleasant, technically capable, and currently engaged in a building project that had run into complications involving local planetary geology that they didn't have the expertise to resolve. They had sent a request for assistance to the Cooperative's Colonial Support Division. The Colonial Support Division had routed the request to the nearest Space Force vessel, because the Resolute happened to be in the neighborhood and because, the routing note said, in the informal shorthand of people who had been watching the Resolute long enough to have opinions about it, they're good at this kind of thing. Sarah read the request. Geological complications. A building project. A colony that needed help. She looked at Thomas, who was at the tactical station. Plot a course, she said. Yes, Commander. Pause. It's not exactly a military situation. No, she said. But they need help. And we're here. Thomas's hands moved over the console. Course plotted. Take us in, Sarah said. The Resolute moved toward the colony. Several light years away, in a database that the Cooperative Council's archivists maintained for exactly this purpose, a record was updated. Under the heading Kepler 442b Incident, the file had been opened 6 years ago and had grown, over that time, into a significant document. Incident reports, diplomatic communiques, intelligence assessments, personal accounts from officers and diplomats and colonists, and one Keth fleet commander whose account was, by many assessments, the most interesting single document in the file. A new entry was added. Brief. A note from Counselor Mira of the Sarah T., who was now the longest-serving current member of the Cooperative Council, who had attended that morning session in which Earth had received its full vote. The entry read, 36 years ago, I argued that humanity would surprise us. I was told I was being naive. That a species with their history of warfare could not be trusted. That the warships were not a sign of potential partnership but of inevitable conflict. They did surprise us. Not by becoming less warlike but by being something that, in my experience, most warlike species are not. Willing to go where the need was greatest even when the cost was high. Willing to talk before fighting even when talking was difficult. Willing to trust character over caution and to be proved right more often than not. They came to Kepler 442b with warships. But they came. That is the part that mattered. They always come. That is what they are. I am glad to have lived long enough to see this day. Counselor Mira, Sarah T. Representative to the Galactic Cooperative Council. The file was marked closed. The story was not. Epilogue, The Things We Carry. 10 years after the Kepler system. Admiral Thomas Park, the promotion had come 2 years ago, and he still wasn't entirely used to it, which he suspected was appropriate, sat in his office on the UES Resolute 2 and reviewed the patrol schedule for the outer sectors. The Resolute 2 was a different ship from the original. A new build, named in honor of the original after the Resolute herself had been decommissioned with full ceremony 4 years ago, her hull preserved in the Space Force Museum at Nairobi where school groups came to look at her and where, if you asked the docents, they could tell you a story about a patrol cruiser that held position alone in a hostile system for a week and started a chain of events that changed the galaxy a little. Sarah Chin was not an admiral. She had turned down the promotion twice more and accepted it exactly once, on the condition that her posting was the Cooperative Council's new Border Security Advisory, which was essentially a diplomatic role with military authority attached. Which was to say, exactly the kind of thing she was actually good at and which let her keep going to places rather than sitting in an office somewhere managing people who went to places. She was, at the moment, on Kepler 442b. Her third visit since the blockade. She had described it in her last message to Thomas as warmer than expected, in both the temperature and the interpersonal sense. Counselor Bresch, now in her third term as colony administrator, had apparently organized a welcome that involved a Vreth ceremony Thomas had never heard of and that Sarah had described with a bewilderment and affection that were equally present. Kren was an ambassador now. The Keth Dominion had joined the cooperative as an associate member 2 years ago, which was a faster process than anyone had projected and which Kren declined to take personal credit for, though his report from the Kepler system had been circulated more widely than almost any diplomatic document in recent history. He and Sarah maintained a correspondence that Thomas was, by mutual agreement of all parties, occasionally copied on because Kren had once said that Thomas was the only human he had met who had named what he was feeling in a Keth diplomatic conference by accident, and he found this worthy of ongoing attention. Fleet Commander Dask had retired from active command 3 years ago, with the kind of honors that the Keth Dominion gave to officers who had served with distinction and survived to tell about it. He had, in retirement, done something that no one had quite predicted. He had written a book. A history of the Kepler incident, from his perspective, in the Keth tradition of military memoir. The translation matrix had some difficulty with the harmonics of his written voice, but the account was considered, by everyone who read it, to be exceptional, direct, honest, and with a quality of reflection that Keth military writing didn't usually manage. He had dedicated it, in the Keth fashion of dedication, a formal acknowledgement of debt that wasn't quite debt, something like remembered together, to 2 people. Kren for telling the truth, and Sarah Chin for coming in person. Thomas had read it 3 times. He sat now at his desk on the Resolute 2 and looked at the patrol schedule and thought about all of this, about the 10 years since a blockade that was supposed to be a demonstration of weakness and became instead something else, something harder to define but real and durable. About the chains of small decisions that added up to outcomes no one person had planned. About a junior ensign who had said a HFY in a Keth conference room without meaning to, and in doing so had named something that had no perfect equivalent in any language he'd yet encountered. The feeling of standing at the far edge of a difficult situation, looking forward, trying to find the path. He picked up his communicator. Wrote a brief message. Commander Chin, Admiral Chin? You've always said you're not sure the title took properly, and I'm inclined to agree. I wanted to let you know that the Resolute 2 has her first patrol rotation in the outer sectors beginning next week. New crew, new ship, same patch of sky. I thought you'd want to know. I've been thinking about what you said once about the warships. That they're a means to an end. The thing that makes the going possible. I think I understand it better now than I did when you said it. The going is the part. The showing up. The willingness to be there when the math doesn't clearly favor it. We're still going. Forward from difficulty. Rear Admiral Thomas Park, U.S. Resolute 2. He sent it. Then he looked at the patrol schedule one more time. Then he went to the bridge. In the Kepler system, on a planet that had once been running out of food and hope in roughly equal measure, the morning sun rose over a field of crops that had no right to be as full and green as they were, crops grown from seeds delivered by a supply convoy escorted by 53 warships that had shown up when no one expected them to. Researcher Yethkara stood at the edge of the field in the early light, making notes in the methodical shorthand of a scientist who has learned to look carefully at living things. The plants were doing well. They had been damaged once by something engineered to destroy them. They had been interrupted and stressed and starved. They had been without light, without nutrients, without the conditions they needed to grow. And then the right intervention had arrived. And they had grown anyway. That was the thing about resilience, she thought. It wasn't that the damage hadn't happened. It wasn't that the stress hadn't been real. It was that something in the nature of living things, something in the nature of communities and species and the networks of care that connected them across distances that should have been too large for care to cross. Something in that nature persisted. And persisted. And persisted, until the conditions were right. And then it grew. She closed her notebook. The sun came up over the field. The crops leaned toward it. Forward from difficulty. The end.